A room made of night, gold light bleeding through the floor like the pulse of something ancient. Still breathing, still waiting, walls black enough to swallow stars. A sound rising from the stone, low, deep, the kind of sound a planet makes when it finally decides to speak. A man kneeling, armor torn from his body with bare hands, blood on his fingers, blood on the floor. His head bowed against warm stone, the strongest commander his empire had ever built, broken without a single blow. And standing over him, a young woman, gold hair catching the light, pale skin, steady eyes full of something that was not mercy and not revenge. Her hand, extended, open, reaching toward the man who destroyed her. She was not forgiving him. She was doing something harder. What makes someone reach for the hand that broke them? 3 days earlier, a jungle that glowed in colors with no name. A warrior bleeding blue into alien dirt, the blade at her wrist already humming. And through the trees, drifting through the mist like it had nowhere to be, the smell of roasted meat. Part 1. The jungle of El Mara did not forgive weakness. It swallowed armies, whole ones, with armor and banners and battle cries that echoed for exactly 3 seconds before the canopy ate the sound. It erased empires, not with fire, not with war, just with patience. And tonight, it waited for one more. Lyra Caven moved through the undergrowth like something already dead. Her legs carried her forward, but her mind had stopped giving the orders several minutes ago. Muscle memory, training, the body doing what the body was built to do even after the person inside it had quit. Her silver combat armor was cracked open at the left shoulder. A clean break. The kind that happens when a plasma round hits at exactly the wrong angle and the metal peels back like skin from a fruit. Blue blood ran in a thin line down her arm, not dripping, streaming, and where it touched the acidic mist rising from the jungle floor. It hissed. She was beautiful. Even now, even broken and bleeding and dragging herself through alien vegetation that glowed in colors that had no name. Her hair was long and gold, true gold. Not the dull yellow of aging metal, but the bright, impossible gold of sunlight trapped in thread. It hung loose now, matted with sweat and forest debris, sticking to her pale skin in wet strands across her forehead and neck. Because the pins that held it in regulation military form were gone, lost somewhere in the retreat, along with her squad, along with her commander, along with every reason she had to keep walking. She looked like a girl, early 20s in human terms, maybe younger, a face that belonged on a palace balcony somewhere, not a battlefield. High cheekbones, skin so white it almost glowed in the bioluminescent light of the jungle. Eyes the color of deep winter, sharp and clear and absolutely empty right now. Empty the way a house is empty after everyone has left. The Valorn sovereignty did not believe in retreat. They did not believe in surrender. And they absolutely did not believe in failure. Failure was not a lesson. Failure was the end of your name, the end of your lineage, the end of everything anyone would ever say about you except in whispers meant to frighten children into trying harder. Lyra had failed. Her entire squad, gone. 11 warriors she had trained with since she was old enough to hold a blade without cutting herself. Dead or captured in the northern basin when the ground offensive collapsed and the enemy line held, and everything Commander Draven Solis promised would break simply did not break. She could still hear the comms going silent, one by one, like candles being pinched out. First Torek, then Vasen, then the twins, and then nothing. Just static, and the sound of her own breathing inside her helmet, and the distant thunder of sovereignty gunships pulling back to orbit without her. They left her. No, that was not accurate. They did not leave her. Leaving implied forgetting, implied accident. The sovereignty did not forget its soldiers. It discarded them. She stopped beside a massive tree root that twisted out of the earth like a frozen wave. Taller than her, wider than her arm span, covered in moss that pulsed faintly blue in the dark. Her knees buckled. She caught herself against the root with her good arm. The bark was warm, almost alive. And for a moment, she just stood there, leaning against something that was not trying to kill her, breathing air that tasted like copper and flowers, and something ancient she could not name. This was the end. She knew it the way you know weather. Not because anyone told her, because her body told her. The blood loss. The pain that had gone from sharp to numb, which was worse because numb meant the body had given up reporting damage. The trembling in her legs that was not from cold. Lyra slowly reached for her wrist blade. The activation pin was a small metal cylinder. Smooth, cold. She had carried it since she was 14. Every Valoran warrior did. Not as a weapon, as a promise. The promise that you would never be taken alive, never be paraded, never be used. You would end yourself cleanly, quickly, with what the sovereignty called dignity. Dignity, she almost laughed. Almost. But her ribs hurt too much, and the sound that came out was more like a cough that had given up halfway. What dignity? She was alone on a planet that smelled like battery acid and rotting flowers, bleeding blue into the dirt, about to kill herself with a blade she had polished every morning since adolescence like it was something to be proud of. She pulled the pin. The blade hummed against her wrist. Familiar, comforting in the worst possible way. She closed her eyes. She thought of Draven, his voice during morning drills, low and steady and absolute. Again, Lyra. Always again. Never enough. Never finished. You are almost worthy. Almost. For 20 years. Almost. She thought of her quarters on the command ship, the narrow cot, the single window that showed stars she had been told to conquer, the small mirror where she braided her hair each morning into regulation form and looked at a face that everyone said was beautiful and no one had ever called kind. She thought of nothing. And then she smelled roasted meat. Her eyes opened, not slowly, not gently. They snapped open the way a trap snaps shut. Because that smell did not belong here. Not on Elmara. Not in a war zone. Not anywhere within 1,000 kilometers of plasma fire and dead soldiers in acidic jungle mist. Roasted meat. Smoke drifted through the glowing vines. Lazy, unhurried, like it had nowhere to be. And it was not the sharp chemical burn of weapons discharge. Not the acrid stink of burning wreckage. Food. Impossible. Through the leaves, through the curtain of a bioluminescent moss. She saw a clearing, small, maybe 10 meters across, of fire, actual fire, burning in a ring of stones that someone had clearly arranged with care. Not an emergency, a habit, and a human, sitting cross-legged beside it, stirring something in a dented metal pan. He was humming, actually humming. A tune she did not recognize, something low and wandering and completely inappropriate for a planet where 3 separate armies were currently trying to kill each other. Lyra stared. Her brain attempted to process what her eyes were reporting and failed. Because what her eyes were reporting was that a member of the weakest known sentient species in the galactic catalog was sitting in the middle of an active combat zone, cooking dinner. Like this was a campsite on some peaceful backwater moon. He was older, much older than her. Hair the color of iron and salt. Cut short but growing out unevenly in the way of someone who had stopped caring about mirrors a long time ago. His face was weathered, creased at the eyes and mouth from decades of squinting into sun or wind or the glare of equipment screens. His hands were rough, thick fingers, scarred knuckles, hands that had built things and fixed things and broken things and built them again. He wore mismatched survival gear, half civilian, half military salvage that clearly did not originally belong to him. A fabric patch on his sleeve read, Earth Expeditionary Survey. The stitching was coming loose. He lifted the pan, sniffed it with critical attention, frowned, reached into a pouch at his belt and added something. Needs more salt, he muttered. Salt? In a war zone? On a planet where the ground mist could dissolve organic tissue, where 3 apex predators hunted in packs after dark, where an entire Valoran ground offensive had just been shattered. Salt. Lyra's wrist blade was still humming against her skin. She had been about to die. She had been ready. She had closed her eyes and made peace with the darkness. And now she was watching a human season his dinner. The human looked up. Their eyes met. There was a pause. Long. The fire crackled. Something in the jungle screamed far away. The mist curled around the edges of the clearing like fingers. He tilted his head, the way you tilt your head at something unexpected but not threatening, the way you might look at a bird that had landed on your windowsill. "Oh," he said, calmly, as if finding a bleeding alien warrior at the edge of his campsite ranked somewhere between finding a spider in the shower and discovering the milk had expired. "You look like you've had a bad day." Lyra waited for the rest, for the panic, the weapon grab, the scream. None of it came. Instead, he gave her a small wave. Casual, easy, completely insane. "You hungry?" Her mind jammed on the question, like a machine fed the wrong input. Hungry. She had been moments from ritual suicide. Her blood was hissing on the ground. Her armor was cracked and her squad was dead, and the sovereignty was hunting her and this human. This soft, small, impossibly calm human was asking if she wanted dinner. Her legs gave out. Not dramatically. She simply stopped being able to stand. Her knees folded, her body tilted, and she went down into the clearing like a building whose foundation had finally given up. The human stood immediately, but not with fear, with concern, purpose, without panic. "Easy," he said, kneeling beside her. "Easy, you're bleeding pretty bad." He inspected her armor with hands that moved carefully but without hesitation. His fingers found the crack at her shoulder, traced the damage, avoided the wound itself. "No sovereignty command tags," he muttered, examining the broken clasps. "You're independent military, frontline unit. That explains why they're chasing you instead of extracting you." She tried to speak. Her throat felt like it was packed with sand. "Why?" The words scraped out of her. "Help." He looked at her, directly, not at her wound, not at her armor, at her. "Because you're alive," he said, as if that was explanation enough, as if being alive was a sufficient reason to receive kindness from a stranger on a dying planet. Lyra did not understand this. She had been trained by the sovereignty since she was 5 years old. Trained to fight, trained to kill, trained to die correctly. And in all of that training, not one single lesson had covered what to do when someone helped you simply because you existed. He moved quickly now, pulling a compact medical kit from his pack. Human tech, bulky and inelegant and covered in scratches and dents. He sprayed foam sealant over her wound. The foam hardened instantly, cold first, then warm, then nothing. The bleeding stopped. "Field patch," he said. "Not pretty, but it'll hold until your biology does the rest." He sat back on his heels. "You're lucky. I'm not just a cook." He paused. "Actually, I am mostly a cook, but I'm also an engineer, which is really just cooking with metal." Lyra stared at him. Part of it was the blood loss. Part of it was the shock. And part of it was the fundamental impossibility of what was happening. "What is your name?" she said. Not a question, a demand, because demands were familiar. Demands were safe. "Callum Hale." He wiped his hands on his pants, left a blue streak, did not seem to notice. "Civilian contractor, Earth Expeditionary Survey, explorer, professional trouble magnet." He paused. "And currently your medic. Though I should warn you, my medical training consists of one weekend course and a lot of aggressive optimism." Her ears twitched, the pointed tips moving independently. A Valorn tell for confusion. "Why are you not afraid of me?" He looked at the pan, stirred it once, looked back at her. "Should I be? I am Valorn." "Okay." "We conquered 12 systems." Sounds exhausting. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the trick, the hidden angle, because everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. The sovereignty taught that as lesson number one. Before weapons, before tactics, before anything, trust is a vulnerability. Exploit it in others, never permit it in yourself. But this human, This Callum Hale, he just sat there, stirring his pan, humming again, like she had told him something mildly interesting about the weather. No hatred, no trembling, no resentment for 20 years of Valorn expansion that had swallowed colony worlds and shattered trade routes. Just mild curiosity. And dinner. The ground trembled, distant but heavy. Armored boots moving in formation, lots of them. Lyra's body went rigid, her training taking over despite the pain. Callum glanced toward the jungle, the glow from the plants reflected in his eyes. Ah, he sighed, that would be your friends. They are not my friends. She said it quietly, but the weight in her voice turned the words into something heavier than volume could carry. Callum looked at her, really looked, and whatever he saw in her face made him nod once, slowly. Yeah, he said. I figured. Thermal lights flickered through the trees, the cold blue of sovereignty tracking beams cutting through the mist. At least 8, maybe more, armed, organized, moving in standard sweep formation. Lyra tried to rise, pain slammed through her shoulder and dropped her back down. She gasped, bit it off, refused to make a sound. Because sounds were weakness, and weakness was death, and she had been ready for death 5 minutes ago, but somehow that readiness had been replaced by something else. Something she did not have a word for yet. Callum calmly picked up the pan, set it aside with careful attention, then he kicked dirt over the fire. Darkness swallowed the clearing. Can you move? He whispered. Not far. Good enough. He slung her good arm over his shoulder, lifted. She was taller than him but lighter than he expected. Valorn bone structure was different. Dense but narrow, built for speed rather than mass. You are smaller than I expected, she muttered, because even now, even bleeding and hunted, she was Valorn, and Valorn observed. That's helpful. Small is quiet. You are foolish. Probably. She could smell him, close like this. Human scent, sweat and something herbal from the food he had been cooking. And underneath that, metal, oil, the smell of someone who spent their days working with their hands. It was not unpleasant. It was specific, real. The opposite of the sterile recycled air on sovereignty warships, where everyone smelled like regulation cleaning solution and nothing else. He moved with surprising confidence in the dark, his steps measured, deliberate. He knew this section of jungle, had mapped it, walked it, made it his own the way humans made everything their own, not by conquering, by learning. Lyra leaned against him and let herself be carried and felt the fundamental strangeness of depending on another person, on a human, on a cook. The sovereignty had spent 20 years teaching her that depending on anyone was a fatal weakness. And yet here she was, alive, because a cook had decided she was worth saving. They moved into the underbrush. Behind them, sovereignty soldiers burst into the clearing, weapons up, scanners sweeping. One of them kicked the still warm stones of the fire ring and growled in frustration. The hunters split into search formation. Pairs, standard radial sweep. They would cover every direction within minutes. Lyra's chest tightened. Not from the wound, from the certainty. They would find them. Humans were fragile, soft, slow. This human could not outrun a Valorn hunting squad any more than a candle could outrun the wind. This was death. Again. Except now she was dragging someone else into it. Callum stopped. He lowered her gently against a tree trunk. Then he tapped a small device on his wrist. Nothing dramatic, just a tap, like checking a watch. A soft pulse radiated outward. She felt it more than heard it. A pressure change in the air, and the jungle responded. Bioluminescent plants flared to life. Not their soft ambient glow. Blinding white, like someone had turned on 1,000 floodlights at once. The entire section of jungle ignited in light so bright, it turned the mist into a wall of blazing white. Sovereignty soldiers roared in confusion, their optical implants overloaded, designed for darkness, calibrated for the jungle's subtle glow. The sudden blast was like staring into a sun at the same time. The ground collapsed. Pit traps, hidden beneath layers of woven vegetation and thin soil. 3 soldiers dropped, their armored weight working against them. The pits were not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to trap. Vine snares snapped upward, catching limbs, jerking bodies sideways, suspending one soldier upside down from a branch thick enough to hold a vehicle. Shock mines detonated, small charges buried in the root systems, not lethal, stunning. The electromagnetic pulse scrambled armor systems and left muscles refusing to cooperate. 8 soldiers, 30 seconds, not one of them dead, but all of them out of the fight. Lyra's eyes went wide. "You prepared this?" "Yep," Callum said, guiding her forward through the chaos, stepping over a groaning soldier with practiced ease. "Surveying new planets gets dangerous. You learn to cook and set traps, sometimes at the same time." "With what?" "Mostly gardening tools, a couple of cooking thermometers, and a very creative interpretation of what counts as non-lethal." The jungle echoed with Valorn shouts behind them. Disoriented, humiliated, warriors trained since birth to be the apex of their civilization, brought down by a man who seasoned his dinner during active combat. Within minutes, silence returned. Callum crouched beside a fallen log, caught his breath, pulled out a small holographic map from his vest pocket and unfolded it against his knee. Blue light painted his face. "Okay," he murmured. "Phase 2. Lyra stared at him. "You expected pursuit. Always do. Alone." He looked at her, seriously, for the first time without humor in his eyes. "Humans survive because we assume we're outmatched, so we plan like we are." In the distance, sovereignty ships roared overhead, low-altitude scan runs, their engines shaking the canopy. Leaves fell like green rain. Callum activated another device, smaller than his palm. He pointed it upward, impressed. Above them, heat decoys launched into the canopy, tiny charges that burned at body temperature. False signatures scattered across kilometers. The ships adjusted course, chasing ghosts. Lyra watched them go, and something inside her cracked. Not broke, cracked. The way ice cracks before water starts seeping through. This human was not reckless. He was not brave in the way the sovereignty defined brave. He did not charge forward or roar defiance at superior numbers. He was prepared, creative, unpredictable. The sovereignty believed strength was dominance. You proved your worth by overwhelming everything weaker than you. This human believed strength was not getting caught. "You fight without pride," she observed. He smiled faintly. "Pride doesn't win anything. Solutions do." For the first time since the battle, since the silence on the comms when her squad went dark one by one, Lyra felt something other than shame. Curiosity. "Why are you truly here, human?" Callum looked toward the sky, through the canopy, where stars were barely visible behind the glow. The humor was still there, but something heavier showed underneath. Something that looked like it had been carried for a long time. "Because your sovereignty is expanding too fast," he said, "and someone needs to understand why before it's too late for anyone to stop it. You are a spy. I prefer curious. Curious people die on Valorn territory. Curious people die everywhere. At least I die well-fed." She studied him carefully. The sovereignty thought humans primitive, undisciplined, weak, a species that had barely left its own solar system. But this one had just outsmarted a trained Valorn hunter squad with cooking thermometers and gardening tools. "You should have let me die," she whispered. He shook his head, a small movement, like dismissing a suggestion that was not worth serious consideration. "No one dies in my camp without at least trying the stew first." Despite herself, despite everything, Lyra let out a faint breath that almost resembled laughter. It surprised her, the sound of it. She could not remember the last time. Above them, sovereignty scanners passed again, their blue light sweeping the canopy. But this time they did not slow, did not circle back, did not detect. They moved on. Callum leaned back against the log, let out a long, slow breath. "See," he said softly, "dinner first, death later." Lyra looked at him, this aging human with a pan that had more dents than smooth surface. This man who had no armor, no weapons, no rank, no reason to be alive on this planet except stubbornness and curiosity and a refusal to eat bad food even when the galaxy was trying to kill him. She had closed her eyes ready for death, and when she opened them, a human was cooking dinner. And somehow, for the first time in her memory, the universe felt uncertain, not dangerous, not safe, just uncertain, which meant it could go either way, which meant it could get better. She did not know it yet, but that was hope. They walked for nearly an hour, not in a straight line. Callum moved through the jungle the way water moves through rock, finding gaps, sliding around obstacles, taking paths that seemed random until Lyra realized they were deliberately confusing, doubling back, crossing streams, stepping on stones instead of soil. "You're hiding your trail," she said. "I'm hiding our trail. Yours is much harder to hide. You bleed on everything." She looked down, blue drops on the leaves behind her. He was right. Callum stopped, pulled a small canister from his belt, sprayed something on the blood spots. The blue faded to brown, then to the color of the soil. "Oxidizer," he said. "Changes the chemical signature. Scanners won't read it as biological." "You carry blood concealment spray." "I carry everything. That's the advantage of having no weapons. Lots of room in the pack, room in the yi." They reached the shelter just as the second moon rose. Callum helped her through the concealed entrance, a narrow gap between root systems that opened into a space larger than it had any right to be. Inside, it smelled like earth and dried herbs and something metallic. Tools hung from hooks made of bent wire. A small workbench sat against one wall. Containers of water, dried plant samples, a stack of data cards held together with a rubber band, and in the center, a fire pit, lined with stones, already laid with kindling. Callum lit it with a device the size of his thumb. The flame caught, small and warm and casting dancing shadows on the woven leaf walls. He set his pan over the flame, added water, added roots he had been carrying in his vest pocket, added herbs from a pouch, stirred. Lyra sat against the far wall, her shoulder throbbing, her body exhausted, her mind still trying to process the last 3 hours. The blade, the smell, the human, the traps, the impossible casual competence of a man who treated a war zone like a kitchen. "Why not leave?" she said. "You have enough data. You know the planet is dangerous. Your supply drop was destroyed. Why stay?" Callum stirred the pot, watched the steam rise. "Have you ever been curious about something?" he said. "Not professionally, not because someone ordered you to be, just curious. The kind of curious that keeps you up at night." Lyra thought about it. Actually thought about it. Searched through 20 years of memories for a single moment of genuine self-directed curiosity. She could not find one. Every question she had ever asked had been in service of a mission. Every investigation in pursuit of an objective. Every observation filed in a report that someone else would read and she would never see again. "No," she said, and the word felt heavier than it should have. Callum looked at her. Really looked. The way he had in the clearing, with a tension that had no agenda behind it. "That might be the saddest thing anyone has ever said to me," he said quietly. Then he reached into his pack and produced a metal cup, filled it with broth, handed it to her. She took it. The metal was warm. The steam smelled like nothing she recognized, but it smelled like care. Like someone had thought about what went into this cup and wanted it to be good. She drank, and it was the first meal she had eaten in 20 years that someone else had made for her. Not a regulation nutrient pack, not a processed ration bar, not fuel for the machine that was her body. A meal, made by hands, given freely. She did not know how to respond to this. No protocol covered it, no training addressed it, so she just drank. And the human sat across from her in the firelight, and the jungle sang outside, and for one long, perfect, improbable moment, nothing was trying to kill them. By dawn, Lyra realized something that tightened her stomach worse than pain ever could. Callum Hale was not just surviving on Elmara. He was building something. Morning light came in broken beams through the jungle canopy, turning the mist into ribbons of gold and green. Strange insects clicked from hidden branches. Somewhere far away, something massive moved through the trees with a sound like stones grinding together. Lyra lay on a bed of woven leaves inside a low shelter that should not have existed. The structure was half buried in earth, masked by vines that had been trained along wire frames to cover every surface, layered with reflective scraps that scattered heat signatures into the background radiation of the jungle floor. Sovereignty scanners would read it as a cold patch of swamp, not worth investigating. It was a human hideout, built by hand, one piece at a time, over 6 weeks of patient effort while the galaxy raged overhead. Callum crouched outside, stirring a pot. Of course he was. He used a flat stone as a cutting board, slicing pale roots into thin rounds and tossing them into broth. He added crushed leaves that smelled sharp and clean. He noticed Lyra awake and gave a small nod. "You're still breathing," he said. "Good news. Means I don't have to file a really awkward incident report." Lyra blinked. "You make jokes about death?" "It's a coping skill." He lifted the pot lid, sniffed, frowned. "Also, this root might be mildly toxic, but only mildly." Her ears twitched. "You guess." "I test carefully." He said it defensively. "Small bites, plenty of water, observe for hallucinations, or falling over." She sat up slowly, wincing as her shoulder reminded her it was still damaged. "Then why remain here? Why not leave?" Callum's expression changed. The humor stayed on the surface, but something harder showed underneath. "Because the sovereignty doesn't just want this planet," he said. "They want what's under it." Lyra's throat tightened. "You know of the vault." His eyes sharpened. The casual cook vanished for a moment. "So it is real." The sovereignty rarely spoke of it openly, but rumors moved through the ranks like current through deep water. An ancient facility buried beneath Elmara's northern basin, older than any living empire. A place where the sovereignty believed they would find a control core. A machine intelligence left behind by the architects. A species so advanced they had vanished from the galaxy before anyone currently alive had learned to light a fire. The sovereignty believed the vault contained a weapon, the kind that did not merely win wars, but made wars unnecessary. Because after you possessed it, no one would dare fight you. Lyra had been ordered to secure the region around the supposed site. Her entire squad died doing it, and Draven Solus had sent them knowing that was likely. She felt that crack inside her widen. "Tell me what you know," Callum said. Quiet, steady, not demanding. Asking. Not as enemies, just as two people who don't want to get erased by the same machine. Every lesson of her people screams silence. Information is power. Sharing is vulnerability. But the sovereignty had already discarded her. And this human had fed her, healed her, protected her, sat across from her and talked to her like she was a person instead of a rank. "I know only what soldiers are told," she said. "The vault is under the northern basin. The sovereignty believes it contains a control core, an intelligence left by the architects. That matches my writings." He pulled out a small data pad, showed her a topographic map covered in annotation. 6 weeks of survey work, geological scans, magnetic field readings, all of them distorted around the same central point. "But every time I get close, my equipment glitches, like the planet is hiding its own bones." "The architects built to confuse." "Yeah, and your sovereignty thinks they can just walk in and press the win the galaxy button." Lyra lowered her gaze. "They think conquest is proof of worth." He handed her a metal cup. Warm broth, simple, clean. "Humans think curiosity is proof of life," he said. She took the cup, drank. The broth was good, not extraordinary, but warm and nourishing and made by someone who gave a damn. And Lyra realized this was the second meal in 2 days that Callum Hale had cooked for her. 2 meals, 2 conversations, 2 moments of sitting across from another being and sharing food. More than she had experienced in 20 years of military service. Because Veilorn did not eat together. Veilorn consumed nutrients efficiently, alone, in regulation periods. Eating was not social. Eating was maintenance. And here was this human, treating every meal like a small ceremony, like the act of feeding someone was its own kind of language. She drank her broth and watched him work. He was constantly adjusting something, fixing, rebuilding. A broken drone wing became a water filter. A cracked visor became a mirror array to redirect sunlight into the shelter. A shredded sovereignty communication cable became a motion sensor net strung between the trees. He made tools out of trash, solutions out of debris, purpose out of wreckage. And Lyra understood something that her people had never been able to articulate about humans. Not because humans were strong, they were not. Not because they were fast or armored or enhanced, because humans were impossible to stop. You could break their equipment and they would build new equipment from the pieces. You could destroy their supplies and they would eat the landscape. You could strand them alone on an alien world and they would make it home. Not defiantly, not heroically, patiently. She was still watching him when she noticed his hand stop. He was holding a communication scanner, one he had modified from Sovereignty Salvage, and he was looking at its screen with an expression she had not seen on him before. Careful, very careful, like a man reading something he wished he had not found. "What?" she said. He did not answer immediately. He tapped the screen, scrolled, read. His jaw tightened. "The squad that came after you last night," he said slowly, "their communications were encrypted, but not well. I cracked the cipher about an hour ago." Lyra waited. The order wasn't capture. She knew. She had known from the moment they opened fire without warning calls, without identification challenges, without any of the protocols that govern the apprehension of a sovereignty officer. But hearing it confirmed was different. "The order was kill," Callum said. "Priority 1, no recovery, no tribunal, just elimination." He turned the scanner toward her. On the screen, a command authorization code. And beneath it, a name. Commander Draven Solis. Lyra's world went white. Not from light, from absence. Every sound in the jungle disappeared. Every smell, every sensation. All of it went away and left nothing but that name on a screen. Draven, who found her in a training facility when she was 5 years old. A small girl with golden hair who could not yet read but could already strip and reassemble a pulse rifle faster than children twice her age. Who looked at her and said to the instructors, "This one, she has potential." Draven, who trained her personally, who pushed her harder than any other recruit, who stood behind her at the range and adjusted her grip and said, "Again." Draven, who she called commander to his face, and father in the deepest, quietest corners of her mind where no one could hear. And Draven had signed her death order. Not with regret, not with hesitation. The authorization code was clean, efficient, filed with the same bureaucratic precision as a supply requisition. She was a line item, a problem to be solved, a loose end. Lyra set the cup down. Her hand was shaking. She could not stop it. She pressed it flat against her thigh and willed it to be still, and it would not. She tried to feel anger. Anger would have been useful. Anger was a tool she understood, a weapon she could wield. But anger requires surprise in some part of her, some deep, quiet part that had been watching Draven for 20 years and noting every contradiction. That part was not surprised. That part had been waiting for this. Because Draven loved the sovereignty more than he loved anything. More than honor, more than legacy, more than the girl he had pulled from a training yard and shaped into a weapon and never once asked what she wanted to become. And Lyra had always known she ranked below the mission, below the objective, below the grand sweeping purpose that Draven wrapped around himself like armor thicker than anything his engineers could build. She had known. She had just never let herself believe it. "He taught me to hold a weapon for the first time," she said. Her voice did not sound like her voice. It sounded like something coming from very far away. "I was 5. My hands were too small for the grip. He wrapped them in tape so I would not get blisters." Callum said nothing. He sat across from her and he listened, and his face held no judgment. No pity, just attention. The steady, quiet attention of a man who understood that some things needed to be spoken before they could be survived. He told me I was almost worthy, Lyra continued. Every year. Almost. I trained harder, fought harder, bled more. And it was never enough, because almost is not a compliment. Her voice cracked on the last word. Almost is a leash. She looked at Callum. And now he wants me dead. Because I failed one mission. Because I survived when I was supposed to die. Because I know about the vault and dead soldiers do not talk. Callum was quiet for a long time. The jungle sang around them. Then he said, "Eat first, everything else after." And he ladled more broth into her cup. Lyra wanted to refuse, wanted to stand up and do something. Fight, run, plan, react. Anything other than sitting still with this earthquake happening inside her chest. But she did not refuse. She drank the broth, and it was warm, and the human sat across from her and did not look away. And that was enough. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to keep her in the present moment instead of drowning in the ones behind her. That evening, Callum showed her the rest of his work. 6 weeks of survey data, geological maps, atmospheric readings, biological samples cataloged in small containers made from salvaged ammunition casings. He had documented El Mara with the patience of someone who believed understanding was more valuable than conquering. "The basin is here," he said, pointing to a cluster of readings on his map. "And every time I get within 2 clicks of center, everything goes haywire. Compasses spin. Electronics glitch. Even my cooking timer stops working, which is honestly the part that offends me most." Lyra studied the map. The anomaly was precisely where Sovereignty Intelligence placed the vault. "You have been circling it for weeks. Circling and mapping and getting nowhere. Whatever's down there, it doesn't want to be found. Or maybe it's waiting to be found the right way." He reached into a compartment at the base of his pack, carefully, and pulled out a small sphere. Lyra's breath stopped. The sphere was the size of a fruit, covered in carved lines so fine they were almost invisible. Patterns that spiraled inward and repeated at scales she could barely perceive. Not human craftsmanship, not Veilorn, not any species she recognized. Architect. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. Callum held it gently, turning it in the firelight. "I didn't get it," he said, his voice low. "It found me. I was exploring a cave system about 3 weeks ago. Fell through a weak floor, cracked my leg, spent about 4 hours in the dark, convinced I was going to die down there. And then this thing rolled out of a crack in the wall, like it heard me, like it was responding." Lyra's neck prickled, the fine hairs rising. Architect machines did not respond to emotional states. They were ancient technology, cold, functional, built for purposes so far beyond current understanding that most species treated them as religious artifacts rather than engineering, unless they were built to respond, unless they were waiting. "May I?" she said, reaching toward it. Callum hesitated, then held it out. Lyra's fingers touched the surface. Nothing happened. For 1 second, 2, 3, the sphere was cold and dark and inert in their hands, like a stone, like a dead thing. And then Callum's hand shifted. His rough fingers brushed against hers on the sphere's surface. Not intentionally, just the natural movement of 2 people holding a small object. Both hands, both species, touching the surface at the same time, and the sphere ignited. Not gradually, not with a warm-up or a boot sequence or any of the predictable mechanical stages that technology usually went through. It went from dead to alive in an instant, like a heart starting, like a first breath. Light, bright and blue and absolutely alive. It poured from the carved lines like water through cracks, flooding the shelter, flooding the clearing beyond, bright enough to turn the jungle canopy into a dome of blazing blue, bright enough that sovereignty patrol ships would have seen it from orbit if they had been looking at the right patch of forest at the right moment. They were not. Callum's heat decoys were still drawing them south. The light stabilized, dimmed to something bearable, and then it focused. Above them, in the air, a holographic projection formed, lines and shapes and coordinates assembling themselves into a three-dimensional map of the terrain beneath the northern basin. Tunnels, chambers, passages that spiraled downward in patterns that matched the carvings on the sphere itself. The vault, complete, mapped, revealed, and at the bottom of the projection, where the deepest chamber lay, a symbol. Lyra recognized it from sovereignty intelligence briefings. Architect script, ancient beyond calculation, but beside it, overlaid, unmistakable, a symbol for Earth. Callum's face went pale. "It never did that before," he whispered. "I've held it 100 times. It never even glowed." Lyra looked at her hand on the sphere, his hand beside hers, both touching, both needed. The sphere had not responded to him alone, had not responded to her alone. It waited for both of them. Two species, two hands, two entirely different reasons for being on this planet. Together. "Humans have been here before," she said quietly. Callum stared at the projection, Earth's symbol burning in light that had waited longer than either of their civilizations had existed. "I don't know," he said, "but this changes everything." Lyra pulled her hand back. The projection faded. The sphere went dark, but the after image remained burned into her vision. Two species needed to open a door that had been sealed since before either of them learned to look at the stars and wonder. Above the shelter, the Sovereignty fleet adjusted orbit. Searchlights swept the jungle. Somewhere in the darkness, Draven Solace was issuing new orders. And Lyra Caven, who had closed her eyes expecting death, who had opened them to a human cooking dinner, who had learned in the span of one night that the person she loved most wanted her dead, and the stranger she trusted least had saved her life. Lyra sat in the glow of a dying fire, and she knew. The morning would bring the vault, and the vault would bring a choice, and the choice would change everything. But for now, right now, there was broth, and firelight, and a human who cooked for strangers because that was his way of saying something he never needed to say out loud, and for the first time in her life. Lyra did not eat alone. Part 2. They descended into the bones of the planet at first light. The cave entrance was not dramatic, not a gaping mouth and a cliff face, not a grand archway carved by ancient hands. It was a crack, a narrow split in the jungle floor hidden beneath a tangle of root systems so thick that Callum had to cut through them with a utility blade, while Lyra held the sphere overhead for light. The sphere glowed faintly now, a soft blue pulse, like a heartbeat, like it knew where they were going and was impatient to get there. "You first," Callum said. "Why me first?" "Because you have better reflexes, and if something jumps out of the dark, I'd rather it be your problem before it becomes mine." Lyra looked at him. He was smiling, and she realized he was not joking. He genuinely believed that sending the injured alien warrior ahead of him into an unknown cave system was the logical choice. Which, to be fair, it was. She went first. The crack narrowed quickly, then widened, then dropped. Not a fall, a slope, smooth stone worn down by water that had stopped flowing centuries ago. They slid more than walked, Callum catching himself against the walls with both hands, Lyra using her good arm in sheer stubbornness. The air changed within minutes. Above, the jungle smelled like copper and acid and living things. Down here, the air was clean, cold, empty in a way that felt deliberate, like something had scrubbed it, filtered it, prepared it for visitors that had not come in a very long time. The sphere pulsed brighter. The walls began to glow in response. Faint lines of blue light running through the stone like veins. Architect construction, not built onto the rock, built into it, as if the mountain itself had been engineered. "This is not natural," Lyra said. "None of this is natural." Callum ran his hand along the wall. "The stone is warm. Feel it." She pressed her palm flat. He was right. warm, not from geothermal heat, from something else, something underneath, something still running after millennia of silence. They moved deeper. The tunnel opened into a chamber, then another, then a passage that branched left and right before converging again 50 meters ahead. The sphere guided them, pulsing stronger when they moved in the right direction, dimming when they drifted. It was leading them. Lyra did not like being led. She had spent her entire life following orders, and the one time she had tried to think independently, her commanding officer had signed her death warrant. Except the sphere did not punish her for hesitating, did not demand she prove herself before showing her the next step. It simply waited, and when she moved, it responded, patient, unhurried, like Callum. She glanced back at him. He had fallen a few steps behind, moving carefully in the dark, his breathing slightly heavier than hers. Human lungs, human endurance. But he did not complain, did not ask her to slow down, just kept moving, one foot in front of the other, steady, persistent. The passage narrowed suddenly, then dropped. A vertical shaft, 3 meters down, smooth walls, no handholds. Lyra looked over the edge. The sphere's light illuminated the bottom. Another passage continuing forward. I can jump this, she said. Can you? Callum peered over, measured the distance with his eyes, calculated. Define jump. Controlled descent. Land on your feet. Don't break anything important. How important are knees? Less important than arriving alive. Callum pulled a length of cable from his pack, tied it around a rock formation at the top of the shaft, tested it with his weight, tested it again, then a third time. You are very cautious, Lyra observed. I am very breakable. He gripped the cable. There's a difference between caution and cowardice. Cowardice is not going down. Caution is going down with a rope. He lowered himself carefully, his boots scraping the smooth wall, his arms shaking with the effort. Halfway down, the cable slipped. He dropped the last meter and landed hard, stumbled, caught himself against the wall. I'm fine, he said before she could ask. I did not ask. You were about to. She was. She jumped, landed softly. Vilorn reflexes, Vilorn balance. The physical advantages of a species engineered for combat over thousands of generations. She held out her hand to steady him. He took it. Brief contact. His hand was warm and rough against her fingers. She noticed that his grip was careful, not limp, not crushing, precisely calibrated to accept help without demanding it. It occurred to her that she had never offered her hand to anyone before. They continued. The tunnels widened again after the shaft. The architect light channels grew brighter, and Lyra became aware of something she could not explain. A presence. Not hostile, not welcoming, just aware. As if the mountain knew they were inside it and was watching them the way a sleeping animal watches with one eye half open. Do you feel that? She said. The thing where it feels like the walls are paying attention? Yes. Since about 200 meters back, he kept walking. I've decided to interpret it as friendly. On what basis? On the basis that the alternative would mean I'm walking deeper into something hostile, and I'd rather not think about that right now. That is not logic, that is denial. In my experience, denial and courage look identical from the outside. She considered this. He was not wrong. We should stop, Lyra said. I'm fine. You are breathing like a broken ventilation system. That's my normal breathing. Then your species has significant design flaws. Yeah. He leaned against the wall, wiped his forehead. We know. They stopped in a small chamber where the ceiling rose high enough to stand comfortably. Callum sat down on a flat rock, reached into his pack, and pulled out a portable heating element. Lyra watched him. He arranged the heating element on the stone floor, set a small metal container on top of it, poured water from a flask, then produced 2 compressed nutrition bars. He broke one in half, put half in the water, kept the other half dry. What are you doing? Cooking. We are inside a mountain. on a hostile planet, being hunted by my former military, descending into an ancient facility that may contain technology capable of reshaping the galaxy. She paused. And you are cooking. Warm food helps you think better. Also, I'm hungry. You are always hungry. I am always cooking. There's a difference. He broke the second bar and held half out to her. Dry ration for now. Broth in 5 minutes. She took it. Ate. It tasted like compressed cardboard with a vague suggestion of grain. But it was food, and he had broken his supply in half without being asked, without hesitating. They sat in silence for a moment. Steam began to rise from the heating container, thin tendrils curling upward in the still air. My wife used to ask me that, Callum said. Quiet, unprompted, as if the silence had loosened something. Lyra's ears twitched. First personal information he had volunteered. In everything before this he had deflected, joked, redirected, made himself a function instead of a person. The cook, the engineer, the trap setter, never the man with a history. Used to, Lyra said. She died 8 years ago, station accident, pressure seal failure. He said it the way you say facts that have been carried so long they have worn smooth. Not without pain, but without the sharp edges. We were on a research platform, outer colonies. She was a botanist, studied plant adaptation in low gravity. I was the maintenance engineer who kept her equipment running. He stirred the broth. After she died, I kept cooking, because that was our thing, every night, no matter how tired, no matter what had gone wrong that day. We sat down and ate together, and I'd cook something, and she'd tell me it needed more salt. And I'd say it was perfect, and she'd say my standards were low, and we'd argue about salt for 10 minutes and then eat, and then everything was fine. He lifted the container, poured broth into 2 cups, handed one to Lyra. Cooking is how I say I care without having to say it. Lyra held the cup. No one had ever said that to her. Not in 20 years of military service. Not in a lifetime of training and deployment, and sleeping in barracks surrounded by other warriors who ate alone and fought alone and died alone, because that was what the sovereignty called strength. She drank the broth. It tasted like warm water with nutrition bar dissolved in it, which was exactly what it was, and it was the best thing she had ever tasted, not because of flavor, because of intent. They moved deeper. The tunnels widened as they descended, architecture becoming more pronounced, walls shifting from rough stone to smooth surfaces covered in carved patterns, the same spiraling designs as the sphere. And then they found the gallery. It was not a room, it was a cathedral, a space so large that the sphere's light could not reach the ceiling. Pillars of dark stone rose into darkness, and on every surface, every wall, every pillar, images, carved into the stone with precision that suggested machines, but artistry that suggested something more. Species, dozens of them, rendered in careful anatomical detail, walking, standing, reaching, and dying. Lyra stopped. Her breath caught. The first panel showed a species she did not recognize. Tall, multi-limbed, clearly advanced. They stood before a structure that looked exactly like the vault, and they chose. In the carving, their representative reached for a weapon, a device of enormous power rendered in stone as a sphere of radiating lines. The next panel showed their civilization burning, not from external attack, from themselves. The weapon turned inward, power corrupted, empire collapsed. The final image showed empty cities and silence. Oh, Callum said softly, standing beside her, reading the stone. The second panel, a different species, aquatic, elegant. They found the vault. They chose a fortress. Total defense. Impenetrable isolation. The next panels showed them withering, cut off from trade, from exchange, from the messy, beautiful chaos of contact with others. They did not die violently. They starved, slowly, behind walls so perfect that nothing could get in, including the things they needed to survive. The third panel showed a species made of crystal, beautiful, geometric. They chose the weapon too. Different weapon, same result. They shattered each other. their remains carved in stone as fragments scattered across an empty sky. Fourth, a species with wings. They chose the fortress, sealed themselves inside a moon. In the final carving, their wings had atrophied, useless, folded against bodies that had forgotten how to fly. Fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, species after species, each one finding the vault, each one making a choice, every single time. Weapon or shield, attack or hide, dominate or isolate. Nobody chose the network. Nobody chose connection. In 11 civilizations spanning millions of years, not one species had looked at the option that meant sharing power, sharing knowledge, sharing vulnerability, and thought, yes, that one. Lyra felt something cold settle in her chest, because she understood why. The network required trust, and trust required believing that other beings would not use your openness to destroy you. And every species in the gallery had looked at the galaxy and made the same calculation that the sovereignty made, that Draven made, that she had been trained to make since she was 5. The galaxy is predators. Protect yourself or be consumed. Every species believed that, and every species died believing it. Callum stood beside her. He had not spoken since the first panel. His face was still, reading the stone the way an engineer reads a schematic, tracing cause and effect, input and output, choice and consequence. 11, he said finally. 11 species, all of them smarter than us, all of them stronger, and all of them wrong. Lyra walked along this gallery in silence. 11 extinctions carved into stone with the patience of something that had watched it happen over and over and still left the door open. Still waited. And then, the 12th panel. Lyra stopped so suddenly that Callum almost walked into her. Humans. The carving showed them clearly, unmistakably, bipedal, upright, 5-fingered hands, clothing that suggested early technological development, not modern, ancient, thousands of years at minimum. They stood before the vault, and in the carving, their representative reached for nothing. The panel was unfinished. The reaching hand extended toward the 3 options: weapon, fortress, network. But it grasped none of them. The stone simply stopped. Or the story had not ended yet. No, Callum whispered. Lyra turned. His face was gray, not afraid exactly. The look of someone seeing a truth they had suspected but prayed was wrong. Humans have been here before, she said. Thousands of years ago. He touched the carving, his fingers tracing the outline of those ancient human hands reaching for the choice they never made. And we didn't finish. You failed. The word hit him. She could see it land. The flinch he almost controlled, but not quite. Yeah, he said. We failed. Lyra studied the panel, below the reaching figure. Architect symbols she could partially read. She had been trained in basic architect translation. All sovereignty officers were. It says they were divided, she translated slowly. Half wanted the weapon, half wanted the network. They could not agree, and the vault does not wait for consensus. It waits for conviction. So they argued themselves out of the running. Yes. Callum sat down, right there on the floor of the gallery, among the carvings of 11 dead civilizations and 1 unfinished story. He put his head in his hands. Lyra watched him. This man who had been steady through everything, through the jungle, through the traps, through the hunters, through the revelation that the person she trusted most wanted her dead. And now he sat on the floor of a dead gallery and looked small. My ancestors were just as greedy as yours, he said, not looking up. I wanted to believe humans were different, that we were the curious ones, the builders. But we came here and we fought each other over the answer just like everyone else. Lyra was quiet, because he was right, and because the easy response, the comforting one, would be a lie. And Lyra had been lied to enough. Perhaps that is why the sphere needed both of us, she said. Callum looked up. Not one species proving it deserves the prize. Two species teaching each other what neither could learn alone. She had not planned to say it. It simply came out, like the truth does sometimes, without permission. He stared at her, and she saw something rearranged behind his eyes. Not hope exactly, the scaffolding that hope might eventually be built on. He stood up, slowly, brushed off his knees. "Okay," he said. "Not a joke this time, just a decision." "Okay." They continued deeper. But something between them was different now. They walked side by side instead of one ahead and one behind. When the tunnel narrowed, they waited for each other. When the sphere's light dimmed at an intersection, they discussed the options. They were equals. What Lyra did not know, what she could not know, was that far above them, the surface of Elmara was changing. Draven Solis stood on the ridge above the northern basin and watched his excavation army tear the jungle apart. He was tall for a Veilorn, broad-shouldered. His hair was silver white, cut close, military regulation to the millimeter. His face was sharp angles and clean lines. His eyes were the color of cold steel, and they missed nothing. 12 armored walkers pushed through the jungle below, cutting trees like grass. Survey drones swept overhead. Portable shield generators hummed at the perimeter. 300 soldiers in full combat armor held the line. This was not a search party. This was an occupation force. Because Draven did not search. Draven took. He had received the reports about the failed hunting squad. 8 warriors, incapacitated by traps, by a human. He had not raged, had not thrown anything or shouted. He had simply read the report, set it down, and revised his approach. More soldiers, more equipment, more force. Because force was the only language the galaxy respected. Force was how you kept the darkness at bay, how you protected the things that mattered, how you protected children like Lyra from a universe that would eat them alive if you let it. He remembered her, 5 years old, standing in the training yard, hair like spun gold, too young for the uniform, too young for the blade, but not too young for the look in her eyes. Determination so pure it was almost rage. He had seen 100 recruits come through that yard. Most broke, some bent, a few hardened into something useful. Lyra had been different. She had not hardened. She had sharpened. And Draven had watched her grow from a small, fierce girl into a warrior who could have been the best the sovereignty had ever produced. Could have been. If she had not developed the one flaw he could not train out of her. Compassion. The tendency to hesitate. To think about the enemy as something other than a target. And now she was underground, with a human, moving toward the vault. Not for glory, not for promotion, for control. Because Draven had seen what happened to civilizations that lost control. He had fought in the border wars, 23 years old, his first command, a colony world called Veroth. The local government had collapsed. No central authority, no military, no order. Just competing factions tearing each other apart over resources and ideology and ancient grievances that had been waiting for exactly this opportunity to become violence. He arrived with a peacekeeping force and found children eating garbage in the streets, families hiding in basements, bodies in the squares, not soldiers, civilians, people who had done nothing wrong except live in a place where the power structures had failed. He restored order with force, because force was the only thing that worked when everything else had burned down. And the children stopped eating garbage, and the families came out of the basements, and the bodies were buried. And Draven learned the lesson that shaped the rest of his life. That order required strength. That strength required control. That the alternative was Vareth. Always Vareth. Everywhere Vareth. Unless someone was strong enough to prevent it. He was not wrong about Vareth. The horror was real. The lesson was valid. But he had applied it to everything. Every situation. Every relationship. Every child who came through his training yard. And somewhere along the way, the lesson that strength prevents suffering had become the belief that strength is the only value, and anything that was not strength, compassion, curiosity, connection, was a liability, a flaw in a girl with golden hair who had the potential to be the best warrior he had ever trained. If only she would stop caring. The vault would ensure the sovereignty was never vulnerable, never Veroth, and if Lyra had to die for that, he told himself it was necessity. He told himself it was the cost of order. He did not tell himself the truth, which was that signing her death warrant had been the hardest thing he had ever done. And he had done it anyway, because that was what strong people did. They made the hard choices. They bore the weight. They carried it alone. "Commander," an officer approached, saluting. "We have detected subsurface energy signatures. 2 biological readings descending into the cave system. 1 Valorn, 1 human." Draven nodded. "Depth, approximately 400 meters. Assemble assault team, 20 units. We go down." "Sir, the cave system is unstable. Heavy equipment may—" "We go down." The officer saluted again, turned, left, and Draven stood on the ridge and felt nothing. Because feeling was a luxury for people who did not carry the weight of civilizations on their backs. Underground. Lyra heard them before she saw them. The sound came through the stone, low vibrations, heavy footsteps amplified by the tunnel acoustics. Not 2 or 3, many, moving fast, moving with purpose. She stopped. Her hand went to her wrist blade. "They found us," she said. Callum listened, his head tilted, reading the sound. 20 at least, full armor, coming from the main entrance. They're not subtle. Draven is not a subtle man. Can we outrun them? No, your species is too slow, and I am still injured. Can we hide? Not from Valorn tracking systems. Not down here. Callum looked at the sphere in her hand. It pulsed steadily, pointing deeper, toward the vault. How far? Maybe a kilometer, maybe less. We keep moving. If the vault is what these carvings suggest, it won't let them just walk in. They ran, not gracefully. Lyra's shoulders screamed with every stride. Callum's breathing went ragged within minutes. The tunnels twisted and branched, and the sphere guided them through turns and drops, and passages so narrow they had to move sideways. At one point, Callum stumbled on loose stone, went down on one knee. Lyra turned back. He was already getting up. Go, he said. I'm right behind you. I am not leaving you. I'm not asking you to leave me. I'm asking you to stay ahead of me so I have something to run toward. She understood this. It was not pride. It was engineering. A goal in front of you is propulsion. Someone behind you is weight. She ran, he followed. The sphere pulsed faster now, almost urgent, as if it too could hear the boots behind them. The sound grew louder, closer. Valorn soldiers moved faster underground than humans. Their enhanced vision turned the darkness into daylight. Their armored boots found purchase on stone that Callum's civilian shoes slipped on. Lyra ran the math in her head. Speed differential, distance remaining, pursuit velocity. They were not going to make it. She had spent 20 years calculating combat odds. She knew this the way she knew her own heartbeat. She kept running anyway. Because for the first time in her life, she was running towards something instead of away from something. The vault, the answer, the possibility that everything she had been taught was wrong, that a man who cooked dinner for strangers might be worth more than an army that conquered worlds. She was running toward that, and it turned out that running towards something gave you speed that running away from something never could. And then the tunnel opened, wide, vast, a chamber that made the gallery above look like a closet. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, and in the center, light. Not the sphere's light, not bioluminescence, something that came from the floor, from channels carved in the stone that spread outward like roots, like veins, like the circulatory system of something enormous and sleeping and nearly ready to wake. They had reached the outer chambers of the vault, and behind them, echoing down the tunnel, boots, voices, commands barked in Valorn military shorthand. Close, very close. Keep going, Callum gasped, but his legs were failing. Lyra grabbed his arm, pulled him forward. He stumbled. She caught him, her injured shoulder blazing. She did not care. They crossed the chamber, found another passage, the sphere burning bright now, the light channels pulsing faster, responding to their presence, welcoming them. And then, Draven's voice. Not shouted, not projected, spoken, at conversational volume, from 30 meters behind them. Lyra! She stopped. Her body stopped before her mind gave the order. 20 years of conditioning. That voice, that tone. She turned. Draven Sola stood at the chamber entrance. 20 soldiers fanned out behind him, weapons raised, targeting beams painting Lyra and Callum with red dots. But Draven's weapon was holstered. He walked forward, alone, into the chamber. You ran, he said. You ordered me killed. I ordered a security measure. You ordered my death. I ordered the protection of this mission. He stopped, 5 meters between them. There is a difference. Not for me. Draven's eyes moved to Callum, brief, dismissive. This is your human. Callum stood beside Lyra, still breathing hard, still wearing mismatched survival gear held together with tape. He had no weapon, no armor, no rank. He had a dented metal pan clipped to his pack. I'm not her anything, Callum said. I'm just the cook. Draven looked at him then, actually looked at him. Not the dismissive glance of a commander cataloging a non-combatant, a real assessment, the kind he used to give enemy officers before engagements. The cook, he said, the cook who disabled 8 of my soldiers with gardening equipment, kitchen thermometers, mostly, the cook who has survived alone on this planet for 6 weeks without weapons, without armor, without training. I have training. I trained as an engineer and as a cook, both of which turned out to be more useful than anything your soldiers brought. Draven's eyes narrowed, not with anger, with recognition. The kind of recognition that a predator gives to something it had mistakenly categorized as prey. You are less foolish than you appear, Draven said. And you are exactly as foolish as you appear, Callum replied. You brought 300 soldiers to crack open a vault that was designed by a species so advanced they make both our civilizations look like children playing with sticks. What did you think was going to happen? You'd drill through it, walk in, take what you wanted, the same way you take everything. That is how the galaxy works. That is how the galaxy has always worked, and the gallery upstairs shows exactly where that leads. Something flickered across Draven's face. Fast. Gone. You have seen the gallery, he said. 11 species, 11 choices, 11 extinctions, carved in stone by the same people who built this place. Callum's voice was steady. No bravado, no challenge, just facts. Your sovereignty is about to be number 12, and you don't even know it. Draven turned back to Lyra. I trained you to stand beside warriors, to lead armies, and you chose to stand beside a cook who lectures me about history. Lyra felt the old pull, the gravity of his disappointment. It had shaped her entire life, always pulling her toward his approval, always making her orbit his definition of worthy. She had spent 20 years running toward that approval, training harder, fighting longer, bleeding more. Anything to close a gap that she now realized had never existed. Draven had invented that gap, built it, maintained it, not out of cruelty, out of control. Because a warrior who believed she was almost good enough would never stop trying, would never question, would never look up from the task long enough to wonder if the task itself was wrong. I did not choose him, Lyra said, quietly, steadily. I chose myself. Draven's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted fast and was immediately sealed. Sentiment, he said. I taught you better than that. You taught me to survive. You taught me to fight. You taught me to die correctly. She held his gaze. But you never taught me to live. Living is a luxury. The strong survive. The rest are remembered. And the remembered, who remembers them? You. Does anyone sit across from you and share a meal because they want to, not because they are ordered to? Silence. The kind that has physical weight. Draven's jaw tightened, barely visible, but Lyra saw it. She had spent 20 years studying that face. She had heard him. Not his body, not his pride. Something deeper. Something he did not have armor for. The moment passed. Enough, Draven said. Cold now, operational. The vault is ahead. The sovereignty will claim it. He turned to his soldiers. Secure the human. Two soldiers stepped forward. Callum did not resist. There was nothing to resist with. They grabbed his arms, pulled them behind his back, forced him to his knees. Callum went down hard, his knees cracking against stone. He grunted, did not cry out. Lyra lunged forward. A soldier blocked her. She could have fought, injured or not. She still knew 7 ways to kill from a grapple position. She did not fight, because fighting was what Draven expected, the response he had trained into her. Attack when threatened, respond to force with force. That was his language, his system, his world, and she was done speaking it. You will watch, Draven told her. His back to Callum, his eyes on Lyra. You will watch what happens when sentiment replaces strength. He nodded to the soldiers holding Callum. They raised weapons, point blank, aimed at the back of his head. Callum's eyes found Lyra's, across the chamber, through the blue light, through the targeting beams. He did not look afraid. He looked sorry, not for himself, for her, because she was about to watch something terrible, and he could not cook his way out of this one. And in that look, in that selfless, impossibly human look of concern for someone else in the moment of his own death, Lyra made her choice. She walked past the soldier blocking her. He was so surprised he did not react. Past 2 more who hesitated because their orders were to secure the human, not to shoot their former commander's protege. She walked to the center of the chamber, between Callum and the soldiers aiming at him. She stood there, no stance, no guard, no blade, her arms at her sides, her golden hair catching the blue light from the floor, looking directly at Draven Solis. You taught me to hold a weapon, she said. You put one in my hands when I was 5 years old and told me that was my purpose. And I believed you. For 20 years. Her voice did not shake. But you never taught me to put it down. Draven's face was stone. Step aside, Lyra. No, that is an order. I don't follow your orders anymore. Then you will die with him. Then I will die standing. The chamber pulsed. Not the sphere, not the light channels, the chamber itself, the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Everything vibrated. A low, deep sound more felt than heard, like a bell the size of a planet being struck once. And then, every weapon in the chamber died. Not powered down. Died. The energy cells drained in an instant. The targeting beams vanished. The armored suits locked, frozen, joints seized, servos dead. 300 kilos of combat armor per soldier becoming 300 kilos of immobile prison. Soldiers screamed, clawed at their own equipment, tried to move arms that would not move. Draven's armor locked last. He had 1 second to feel his suit stiffen around him, to feel himself become a statue. His eyes, in that last second before the visor sealed, found Lyra's, and she did not see anger, did not see fury or hatred. She saw surprise, genuine surprise. The look of a man who had built his entire world on the certainty that strength was the only answer, and who had just watched that certainty shut down around him. The chamber pulsed again. The light channels flared. The stone hummed. Callum was on his feet, the soldiers frozen around him. He rubbed his wrists, looked around at 20 soldiers locked in place like metal sculptures. That's new, he said. Lyra was shaking, not with fear, with adrenaline, with the aftermath of standing between a firing squad and a friend and choosing not to fight. The vault, she whispered. It responded. To what? To me putting the weapon down. The far wall split open. Not a door. A passage, wide, lit from within by light so bright it turned the blue channels white. The vault, the real vault, opening for them, because a woman who had been taught only to fight had chosen to stand still. From behind them, muffled by sealed armor, Draven's voice. I will find you. Whatever you find in there, it belongs to the sovereignty. It belongs to strength. Lyra looked back at the frozen figure of the man who raised her. Strength is not what you think it is, she said, and she ran, with Callum, into the light, behind them, the passage sealed shut, stone grinding closed, locking Draven and his army in a chamber full of dead technology and the slowly dawning realization that the galaxy's most ancient test did not care how many soldiers you brought, only whether you knew when to stop fighting. The sphere in Lyra's hand dissolved into light that flowed into the walls, as if it had finally come home after thousands of years of waiting. And somewhere above them, on the surface of Elmara, a pulse rippled outward from the basin. The jungle's glow plants shifted from blue to gold for a moment, then back. But the predators stopped hunting, and the wind stopped blowing, and the planet held its breath. Part 3. The vault was not what she expected. Lyra had imagined something cold, something hard and metallic and ancient in the way that dead things are ancient. A tomb, a weapon locker, a machine room. What she found was a room made of night. The walls were black, not painted, not coated, black the way space is black, a blackness so complete it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And yet the room was not dark, because the floor glowed, soft gold channels running through the stone in patterns she recognized, the same spiral designs as the sphere. Except here, they were alive, pulsing, breathing, shifting in ways that suggested consciousness. Not artificial intelligence, something older. The room was warm, not heated, warm the way a body is warm. Lyra touched the wall and felt it respond. A slight vibration, like a heartbeat adjusting its rhythm to match her own. She pulled her hand back. The room was larger than it should have been. The entrance passage had been narrow, 2 people wide at most, but this space stretched in every direction. Not infinitely, but far enough that the walls faded into darkness before they reached an end. And it was quiet. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of a full one, of a place so dense with presence that sound itself felt unnecessary. Lyra had experienced silence before. The silence of space through a viewport, the silence of a barracks at 3 in the morning, the silence of a comm channel when the last member of your squad stops transmitting. This was different. This silence was alive, listening, attentive. The silence of something ancient and patient sitting across from you and waiting for you to speak first. It's alive, Callum said, standing beside her, still breathing hard from the run. Not alive, Lyra said. Waiting. Callum walked slowly around the perimeter, his hand trailing near the wall but not touching. An engineer studying a system he did not yet understand. How old, he asked, not to Lyra, to the room, to the air, to whatever was listening. No answer, but the gold channels in the floor pulsed once, brighter, as if acknowledging the question without offering a response. Older than us, Lyra said. Older than the sovereignty. Older than whatever species carved those panels in the gallery. Older than language. Perhaps, or perhaps it invented language and then forgot it because it found something better. Callum looked at her, surprised. It was the first philosophical observation she had made in their time together. The first statement that was not tactical or informational or defensive. She surprised herself too. The room seemed to agree. Because in the center, rising from the floor like a growth rather than a construction, a pillar of that same dark material, and above it, hovering, 3 projections. The first was red, bright arterial red, a weapon, not a specific device, an idea of a weapon, a sphere of radiating force that pulsed outward in waves. Power, dominance. The second was blue, cold deep blue, a fortress, walls within walls within walls, total isolation, total protection. The third was gold, warm gold, like firelight, like morning, a network, lines connecting points, points connecting to more points. An expanding web of light that grew and grew, not by force, by invitation. Weapon, shield, connection. The same three choices carved on the gallery walls. The same three choices that 11 species had faced. The same three choices that ancient humans had reached for and argued over and failed to make. "They're beautiful," Callum said quietly. They were, and that was the trap. Beauty was the oldest trap in the galaxy. Make something irresistible and watch what people reveal about themselves when they reach for it. "We cannot choose," Lyra said. "What?" "The gallery, the carvings, every species that chose was destroyed. Weapon, fortress, network. It does not matter which one you pick. Picking is the test, and picking is the wrong answer." "Then what's the right answer?" "I don't know." The three projections shifted, not disappearing, rearranging, moving apart. The red weapon drifted left. The blue fortress drifted right. The golden network stayed center, but rose higher, out of reach. And the pillar in the center changed. Its surface rippled. And then it projected something new. Not a symbol, not a weapon, not a choice. A question, not in any language. In light, in feeling, in a vibration that entered through the floor and rose through their bones and settled somewhere behind their eyes, where language lived before it became words. The question was not, "What do you want?" The question was, "What will you give up?" Callum felt it first. She saw his face change, the humor draining away, something older surfacing. He took a step forward, involuntary, drawn. The vault showed him Draven, not the real Draven, a projection, perfect in detail, standing frozen in his armor, helpless. And beside the projection, a control, not physical, conceptual. The vault was offering Callum the ability to end Draven, not kill him, unmake him, erase his authority, his power, his certainty, revenge, clean, complete, justified. The man had tried to kill him, had kneeled him on stone with weapons pointed at his head, had looked at him and seen nothing worth preserving, and now the vault was saying, "Here, take it. He deserves it. You earned it." Callum stared at the projection. His hands were fists at his sides, knuckles white. Lyra could see the war happening inside him, not between good and evil, between what he wanted and what he believed. Because he wanted it, she could see that too. The desire for payback was written in his shoulders and his jaw and the way his weight shifted forward. "I didn't come here for this," he said. The vault pulsed, patient. "I didn't come here to punish anyone." His voice was rough, fighting itself. "I came because I was curious, because I wanted to understand, because—" He stopped, breathed. "Because my wife died and I couldn't save her, and I couldn't fix it, and the only thing I could do was keep moving forward and keep cooking for people and keep being useful, because if I stopped being useful, I would have to feel everything I've been putting off for 8 years. His voice cracked on the number. Lyra watched him, this cook who fed strangers and set traps for enemies and carried his grief in a dented pan he never let out of his sight, because it was the last piece of a kitchen he had shared with someone who told him his food needed more salt. "I don't want revenge," Callum said. "Quiet now, steady now. I want to make dinner for someone again. That's all I ever wanted." The projection of Draven dissolved. The vault accepted his answer. Lyra felt it, a shift in the room, subtle, like a lock turning. And then the vault turned to her. She knew before it happened. The pressure change, the electricity in the air, something building toward her. The projection that formed in front of her was not a weapon, not a fortress. It was memory. Her memory. Played back in perfect fidelity. Not video, not hologram. Sensation. She was 5 years old, standing in the training yard. The uniform was too big. The blade was too heavy. The sun was too bright, and she was squinting, and her hands were wrapped in tape because they were too small for the grip. Draven's voice, from above, from the enormous height of an adult speaking to a child. Again, she swung the blade. It wobbled. She missed the target. Again, she swung, missed. Again, she swung, connected. The target cracked. Almost worthy. The memory shifted. 12. Night training. Rain coming down in sheets. She was first in every exercise. Always first. Not because she was fastest. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the silence. The barracks at night, the empty cot. 15. First combat deployment. The sick terror buried under discipline. 18. Promotion. Draven's hand on her shoulder. You have exceeded expectations. Not worthy, not finally. Exceeded expectations. Which sounded like praise until you realized expectations were just a higher version of almost. 20. Her first solo command. A forward observation post on a moon with no name. 3 soldiers under her authority. One of them asked her once, over rations, in the quiet of a night shift, what she wanted to do after the military. She did not understand the question. After. As if there was an after. As if the military was a phase, a chapter, something with an ending. She had been in the military since she was 5. She would be in the military until she died. There was no after. There was only this, and more of this, and the discipline to keep doing this without asking why. She told the soldier to focus on the mission. He never asked again, and she never forgot the question. 22, 24. Missions, battles, victories that felt like nothing. Years measured in deployments and body counts, and the slow, quiet erosion of something she did not know she had because no one had ever told her what it was called. Hope. It was called hope, and it had been dying inside her since she was 5 years old. The vault showed her all of it. Every year, every meal eaten alone, every night in barracks surrounded by warriors who did not know her name. Every time she looked in a mirror and saw a face everyone called beautiful and no one called loved. And then it offered her the choice. Forget. The vault could erase it. All of it. The pain, the loneliness, the betrayal, the training yard and the rain and the blade and the voice that never said enough. It could take the damage away and leave her clean. New. Unburdened. Free. All she had to do was let go. Lyra stared at the projection of her own memory. 5 years old, tape on her hands, too big uniform, and she felt the tears. She had not cried since she was 4. Before the training facility, before Draven, before the blade and the yard and everything that came after. She had not cried because crying was weakness and the sovereignty had rules about everything, including grief. But the vault did not have rules, and the tears came. Not dramatic, not a flood. They simply appeared, one at a time, running down her cheeks, catching the gold light from the floor, falling onto the black stone where they glowed briefly, like small stars. Callum did not move toward her, did not try to comfort her. He stood where he was and had the wisdom of knowing that some tears need to fall without someone trying to catch them. Lyra wiped her face with the back of her hand. No, she said. The vault waited. This pain is mine. Her voice was thick, rough, unsteady, but certain. I earned it. Every piece of it. Every year. Every night alone. Every meal I ate standing up in a hallway because no one ever asked me to sit down. She looked at the projection of her younger self, that small girl with golden hair and frightened eyes. And she did not feel pity. She did not feel anger. She felt gratitude for surviving. This pain taught me what kindness feels like, she said. Because you cannot know what warmth is unless you have been cold. And I was cold for 20 years. And then a human made me soup. She almost laughed, because it sounded absurd. A galaxy-spanning test of worthiness, and the answer was soup. But it was the truest thing she had ever said. If you take the pain away, I lose the reason the soup mattered. I lose the reason his voice mattered when he said, eat first. I lose everything that taught me what I was missing. She shook her head. I don't want to forget. I want to remember, and I want it to make me better instead of harder. The projection dissolved. The vault accepted her answer, and the room changed. The weapon dimmed, the fortress dimmed. Only the golden network remained, brighter now, warmer, pulsing with something that felt less like technology and more like invitation. Callum stepped toward it, his hand raised, the gold light reflected in his eyes. But before he touched it, the pillar projected one more message. Who stands with you? Callum stopped, his hand still raised. He turned, looked at Lyra, not asking, not requesting, just looking, with the quiet patience of a man who had learned a long time ago that you cannot pull people toward you. You can only stand where you are and let them decide. And Lyra understood the question the vault was really asking. Not who would share the power, not who would benefit from the network, not who deserved to stand at the center of a galaxy-changing moment. Who would you choose to be with when everything else was stripped away, when there were no ranks, no orders, no obligations, no strategic advantages? Who would you walk toward? Not because you had to, because you wanted to. She had never been asked that before. She had never been given the choice. Her entire life had been assignment, in deployment, and placement. Stand here, go there, fight this, die correctly. Nobody had ever said, where do you want to stand? Lyra walked to him. Not fast, not slow. She walked the way you walk towards something you have been moving toward your whole life without knowing it, until she stood beside him, her shoulder next to his, her hand not touching his, but close, close enough. The first freely chosen position of her life, two species standing together before a choice that had been waiting longer than either of their civilizations had existed. And then, behind them, the passage they had come through, the one the vault had sealed, it ground open. Lyra turned. Draven Sola stood in the opening. His armor was dead, locked and useless around him, but he had torn himself free. Not with technology, not with tools, with his bare hands, ripping the frozen joints apart, breaking the seals, pulling himself out of 300 kilos of metal. He stood in the entrance wearing only the thermal undersuit. No weapons, no shields, no command authority, just a man. Bleeding from a dozen cuts where the armor had torn his skin, breathing hard, his hair matted with sweat, his hands raw and broken from clawing metal apart. 20 soldiers behind him had not freed themselves. Their armor was too well built, too perfectly designed, too strong. Draven's armor had been the strongest of all, and he had broken out of it anyway, because the one thing the Sovereignty's engineers had never accounted for in their armor designs was the possibility that the person inside it would tear it apart from within. They built armor to protect. Draven used it like a cage, and he had spent his entire life escaping cages, even the ones he built himself. He stood in the entrance and he breathed and he bled, and his eyes were exactly the same. Cold steel, absolute. But something underneath the steel was different. Something that had started cracking when his armor locked, and Lyra looked at him with an expression that was not fear and not hatred, but something worse. Understanding. He walked into the vault, past the dim weapon projection, and he stopped. And he looked at the red light, the weapon, the power, the thing he had crossed a galaxy and ordered deaths and torn himself free of dead armor to claim. He reached for it, his bleeding hand extended, shaking, and the vault responded. Not with a weapon, with truth. The red projection exploded into images, not outward, inward, into Draven's mind, the Sovereignty's history, all of it, unedited, unfiltered. Worlds burning, not in the clean way military reports described, the real way. Cities full of people who had done nothing except live on a planet the Sovereignty wanted. Children running through streets about to become craters. Families in shelters that would not shelter them. Civilization after civilization. Crushed. Not because they were threats, because they were in the way. And the sovereignty had called it security, had called it necessary, had called it the price of order. Draven watched, his hand still extended, but his fingers were no longer reaching. They were frozen, open, trembling, because the vault was not finished. The images shifted, away from empires, towards something smaller, a training yard, sunlight, a small girl, golden hair in a braid already coming loose, uniform too big, blade too heavy, 5 years old, crying. Not disciplined tears, real tears. The kind that come from a child who does not understand why she has been taken from everything she knew and given a weapon and told this is her life now. And standing over her, a man, looking down at a crying child and saying, again, not cruelly, with absolute conviction that this was right, that hardening this child was the only way to protect her, that the galaxy was predators and the only mercy was making her strong enough to survive. But the vault did not show Draven what he believed he was doing. It showed him what he actually did. It showed the crying stopping. Not because the pain ended, because the child learned that crying did not help, that no one was coming, that comfort was not part of the curriculum. It showed the light going out of her eyes. Year by year, the brightness of a 5-year-old becoming the efficiency of a 10-year-old, becoming the emptiness of a 20-year-old who could kill without hesitation and eat without company and sleep without dreaming because dreams were unproductive. It showed him exactly what he had built. Not a warrior, a weapon, made from a child who had once cried in the sunlight because she was scared. Draven's hand dropped. His knees buckled, not from injury, not from exhaustion, from weight, the weight of seeing clearly, for the first time, without the filters of duty and necessity and the comfortable fiction that strength justified everything. He kneeled on the vault floor, the warm floor, the floor that pulsed with gold light. His head dropped forward, his broken hands pressed flat against the stone, and Draven's solace did not make a sound, because his grief, like everything else about him, was silent. Lyra watched. She had imagined this moment in the dark hours. Draven brought low, made to understand, made to feel what he had done. But standing here, in this light, watching the strongest person she had ever known kneel on the floor of an ancient vault and break without a sound. She did not feel victory, she felt grief. For him, for the man who had looked at a 5-year-old and seen potential and poured everything he had into shaping it, and never realized that what he was pouring was poison, because it was the only thing he knew how to give. Callum's hand was still raised toward the golden network. He looked at Lyra, waiting. But Lyra was not looking at the network, she was looking at Draven. This man who had found her, trained her, made her, signed her death, tried to kill the only person who had ever cooked for her. This man kneeling on the floor with bleeding hands and a silence so heavy it bent the light around him. "Don't," Callum said softly. Not a warning, a question. "You don't have to." "I know." She walked toward Draven. Each step was a choice. The first step was the hardest, because her body remembered every time she had walked toward him before. Every morning report, every training session, every mission briefing. She had always walked toward Draven with purpose and discipline, and the desperate invisible hope that this time he would look at her and see something worthy instead of something almost. This was different. She was not walking toward him for approval, not for orders, not for the validation she had chased for 20 years across 12 star systems and 100 battlefields. She was walking toward him because he was on the floor, and someone needed to offer a hand, and she was the only one who could, because Callum could not do this. A stranger's mercy was easy. It cost nothing to forgive someone who had never hurt you. That kind of grace was free. But the grace of the wounded, the hand extended by the person who was damaged by the person kneeling, that cost everything. That was the expensive kind, the kind that mattered. She stopped in front of him. He looked up. His face was wet. Not dramatically, just wet. And his eyes. Those steel eyes that had never shown uncertainty in 20 years of her watching them. Those eyes were lost. Not broken, lost. Like a man who had been walking a road his entire life and had just discovered it ended at a cliff. "Stand up," Lyra said, not gently, not harshly, with the exact tone of someone stating a fact. Draven stared at her. "I do not forgive you," Lyra said. "I do not forget what you did. I do not forget the yard, or the blade, or that you signed an order to kill me because I became inconvenient." Each sentence was a stone, placed carefully, building something. "But I will not leave you here." His expression broke, not shattered, broke the way ice breaks in spring, along lines that had been forming for a long time but had never been allowed to reach the surface. "Why?" he said, the word barely a sound. "Because someone cooked me dinner when I was bleeding. Because a stranger fed me when my own commander wanted me dead. And if a human can feed an enemy, then I can lift one." She extended her hand. Not an embrace, not friendship, not reconciliation. A hand, open, extended, steady. Draven looked at it, and the vault. The ancient patient vault that had watched 11 species choose wrong and one species fail to choose at all. The vault watched a woman who had been taught only to destroy extend her hand to the man who had destroyed her. Not because he deserved it, because she chose it, and the room changed. Gold light flared, not from the network projection, from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, the air itself. Gold light pouring through the architect channels like water through a dam that had finally released. Because this was the answer. Not a species choosing correctly, not courage or strength or intelligence. The answer was someone who had been broken reaching out to the person who broke her. Callum touched the golden network, and it responded. The projection expanded. Instantly, the golden web spread outward from the vault, through the stone, through the mountain, through the crust of the planet, upward, into the sky. Lyra felt it in her bones, in her blood, a vibration that was not sound, a warmth that was not heat, something waking up, something that had been sleeping for longer than any species in the galaxy had existed. The architect network, above them, on the surface. The ground shook, gently. The sovereignty soldiers in the outer chamber felt their dead armor unlock, joints freeing, visors opening, weapon systems rebooting. But the weapons would not fire, not damaged, reprogrammed. Targeting systems replaced with scanning protocols. Energy cells recalibrated for survey work. Instruments of war converted into instruments of discovery. 300 soldiers stared at their own equipment in confusion. One soldier raised her weapon at a tree, pulled the trigger. Instead of a plasma bolt, a scan beam, blue and harmless. It mapped the tree's biology in 3 dimensions and projected the data onto her visor. Species, age, root system, symbiotic relationships with the surrounding soil. She lowered the weapon, looked at it, looked at the data floating in her display, and for the first time in her career, she learned something about a planet instead of destroying part of it. Across the basin, other soldiers had similar experiences, weapons that showed instead of killed, armor that analyzed instead of defended, targeting systems that identified life forms not as threats, but as life forms, with names and classifications and biological data that scrolled across visors in languages the soldiers could actually read. Above the basin, sovereignty ships in orbit received new instructions. Weapons arrays reconfigured into communication relays. Shield generators became signal amplifiers. Their war fleet became a network of listening posts turned toward the stars. Not destroyed, not defeated, transformed. The way a seed is transformed when it breaks open. The shell destroyed. The potential released. What emerges looks nothing like what was planted, but it was always inside, waiting for the right conditions. The conditions were a woman extending her hand, and a man touching a light, and a cook making soup on a ridge, and then messages, not from the vault, from Earth. Diplomats, scientists, engineers, linguists, doctors, not war fleets, people, reaching out through channels that had not existed 30 seconds ago, offering, asking, sharing. Agricultural techniques for growing food on arid worlds, medical research on diseases that cross species boundaries, engineering innovations for building structures in low gravity, music, art, mathematical proofs. A cookbook, because of course a human species would include a cookbook in its first transmission to the galaxy. Callum would have approved. The Golden Network expanded beyond Elmara, into the system, into neighboring systems, across the arm of the galaxy, an expanding web of light connecting worlds that had never spoken, species that had never met, civilizations that had spent millennia in isolation suddenly receiving a signal that said simply, "Hello, would you like to talk?" The projections faded. The weapon was gone. The fortress was gone. The network remained, not as projection, as reality. Lines of gold light threading through stone, through the planet, through the sky, and the vault began to sink. Slowly, the walls descending, the ceiling lowering, the floor settling back into the earth, not collapsing, returning, like a flower closing at dusk. As the vault disappeared, one final message shimmered in the air, not in any single language, in every language, simultaneously. The galaxy belongs to those who build together. Then it was gone, and they were standing on the surface, on the ridge where Draven's army had set up camp. The equipment was still there but changed. Walkers motionless, drill arms retracted, sovereignty soldiers milling in confusion. Some had removed their armor. Others stood in small groups talking in quiet voices. The jungle was already growing back, torn earth filling with new shoots, felled trees sprouting from stumps. El Mara healing itself with a speed that suggested the planet had been waiting for permission. The sky was different. The fleet in orbit had repositioned. Communication arrays pointed outward, receiving, transmitting, connected, in golden light. Faint but visible, threading between the ships, between the stars. Callum sat down, right there, on the ridge, on the dirt. He reached into his pack, pulled out his pan, his heating element, a flask of water, his last 2 nutrition bars. Lyra watched him. "What are you doing? What does it look like?" "You are cooking." "Yep." The galaxy just changed. Every weapon on this planet was just converted into exploration equipment. An ancient network dormant for millennia just activated. And you are cooking. The galaxy can wait. Dinner can't. She sat down. On the dirt, on the ridge, next to a human who was making soup from a nutrition bar in water in a dented pan on a planet that was rewriting itself around them. And she took off her shoulder plate. The cracked one. The silver armor that had been broken since the battle that started all of this. She unclasped it, pulled it free, set it on the ground beside her. Without it, she felt something release, something in her back, in her shoulders, in the place between her ribs where she had been holding tension since she was 5 years old. She let it go. Callum stirred the soup, added salt from a pouch. He always added salt. "There's enough for 3, he said. Lyra looked behind her. Draven stood 30 meters away. He had climbed the ridge after them, without armor, without soldiers, without any of the trappings of command. He was just standing there, at the edge of the clearing, watching them, his hands at his sides, his raw fingers curled slightly. He looked exhausted, not physically, the thing behind his eyes, the thing that had been steel and certainty for as long as Lyra had known him. That thing looked like it had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just realized it was allowed to set it down, but did not know how. "Sit down," Lyra said. He did not move, and she understood why. Because in his entire life, no one had ever asked him to sit down and eat. Not since before the military, not since before the wars, not since before he became the kind of man who solved everything with strength, because strength was all anyone had ever offered him. He did not know how. Lyra stood up, walked toward him, stopped close enough to see the cuts on his hands. "You do not deserve this," she said quietly. "You do not deserve to sit with us. You ordered me killed. You spent my entire life teaching me that love was weakness." Draven's jaw tightened. "But I am not doing this because you deserve it. I am doing this because someone did it for me when I did not deserve it either." She turned, walked back to the fire, sat down, and waited. Callum poured soup into 3 cups, set the third one on the ground between them, said nothing, just cooked, just served. The simple, impossible, radical act of making food for someone. Draven stood at the edge for a long time, and then he walked forward. 1 step, 2, 3, each one slow, each one deliberate, each one visibly costing him something. This was the hardest thing Draven Solis had ever done. Harder than combat, harder than command, harder than tearing himself free of 300 kilos of dead armor with his bare hands. Because those things required strength, and strength was all he had. This required something he had spent a lifetime refusing to develop. The ability to be small, to be uncertain, to walk toward 2 people sitting by a fire, and admit by the act of sitting down that everything he had believed about power and control and the proper ordering of the galaxy might have been wrong. Every step was a surrender, not to an enemy, to a truth. He stopped at the fire, looked down at the cup on the ground, steam rising from it, nutrition bar dissolved in water, the most basic meal imaginable, the kind of thing a survival manual would describe as adequate caloric intake for short-term field operations. But it was warm, and someone had made it, and there was a place for him. He sat down, heavily, the way a man sits when adrenaline and authority have both run out. He picked up the cup. He did not drink immediately. He held it in both hands, his broken raw fingers wrapped around the warm metal, and he stared at the steam and his hands shook. Nobody spoke. Callum sipped his soup. "Needs salt," he muttered, then paused, looked at the sky. She would have liked this. Draven raised the cup, slowly. He drank. And he did not say it was good, did not say thank you, did not say anything at all. But he drank. And Lyra sat beside a fire on a ridge on a planet that was healing itself beneath a sky full of golden light. She sat beside a human who cooked because love was too big a word to say out loud, and across from a man who was learning for the first time that strength was not everything. That sometimes the strongest thing you could do was sit down and eat and let someone feed you. Above them, the golden network pulsed, gentle, steady, messages flowing between worlds, old enemies hearing each other's voices for the first time. Below them, the jungle sang, bioluminescent plants shifting from blue to gold, the planet breathing deeply, and at a small fire on a ridge. 3 people who should have been enemies ate the worst soup any of them had ever tasted, and it was enough.